Standing in front of Bleak House, a house owned by the Armstrongs during the Civil War. James Longstreet arrived here on the 18th of November, 1863, and made this his headquarters for the next couple of weeks during the investment of Knoxville. This house figured prominently in the action on the 17th and 18th. There were sharpshooters posted in the tower in this house.
Can't quite see it from this angle, but we'll swing around. I'll give you a shot in a second.
Okay. And when William Sanders and his cavalry were conducting a delaying action a few hundred yards down the Kingston Pike between us and Knoxville.
It's going to be off in this direction, using my convenient selfie stick to get us oriented here, so off in that direction.
Exactly. Orlando Poe, the engineering officer in Burnside's 9th Corps, needed a little bit of time to complete the fortifications around Knoxville. And Sanders was posted out here to the west after Burnside had fallen back into Knoxville, down the Kingston Pike ahead of us. He held up Longstreet's advancement on the 17th of November and then on into the 18th. When that was going on, Sanders found himself under fire from the sharpshooters in the tower in the house behind us. He called back to the fortifications, and particularly to what became, it was called Fort Loudon when the Confederates occupied it.
Now you say it was called, but then it gets a new name.
It gets a new name because, unfortunately, William Sanders falls on the 18th here on the Kingston Pike when his line, he makes a stand, and the Confederates finally break through that line, killing a number of his men and him, and the rest fall back into Knoxville. But before that happens, he called back to Fort Loudon, which became Fort Sanders, named after him.
That's how you get it. That's how you get a fort named after you. You have to get killed, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And here in Tennessee, that's how it works. All the fortifications around Knoxville are all named after fallen federal officers. But anyway, Lieutenant Benjamin, 2,500 yards away from where we're standing right now, had a Hotchkiss gun which he aimed at the tower behind above this house behind us, and put a shell right into that tower, killing 3 sharpshooters. The Federals later called it the prettiest shot of the war.
And you mentioned that the 3 sharpshooters are actually sketched on the wall in there.
They are indeed, and they're still sketched there, and the drawing is protected under plexiglass at this point. But somebody drew their likenesses on the wall. It's a very nice drawing. Unfortunately, their identities remain a mystery because they were not identified in that drawing.
I'll put in an opportunity here that there's actually a nice Civil War Trails marker here. You can see that right behind me. That actually talks about this story and has a picture of those 3 men on it. So our friends at the Civil War Trails doing some cool work there. So after all this action takes place here, Jim, Longstreet is going to occupy this house behind us for a period.
That's correct. The lines around Knoxville, the Poe's lines of defense, run in a circle. They're both north of the river and south of the river, the Tennessee River. It's called the Holston at that time. It was not the Tennessee at that time. Of course, Longstreet spent a good bit of time riding those lines, looking for the best place to attack the 9th Corps' fortifications. It turned out that he was here until early December. The actual attack occurred on the 29th of November in the early morn, and we'll talk about that more when we get
down to our next stop.
Get down to our next stop. But he was here a total of 2 weeks plus. This was supposed to be a lightning strike, I might remind you, Chris.
Right.
When he was broken away from Bragg's army at the Siege of Chattanooga, he was supposed to get up here to Knoxville and seize the town, capture what Federals he could, and return quickly to continue the investment of Chattanooga. Things didn't work out, I'm afraid, because of a number of things. Logistically, it was a total disaster. He had been promised provisions up the line. The provisions weren't there. He'd been promised trains that didn't appear. What trains he did have were totally inadequate to the task. So they ended up doing a lot more marching than train riding. So it took them a lot longer to get up here in the first place. And thanks to Burnside's able stand out at Campbell Station and falling back into Knoxville.
And those are two words that a lot of people don't put together, Burnside and able. It's
Burnside, this is one of his finest hours.
Yeah.
He conducted himself very well throughout this campaign and deserves a lot of credit for what became a Confederate debacle.
We're going to talk a little bit more about that. We're going to talk a little bit more about Longstreet's leadership here and kind of how Burnside proves his ableness at one of our further stops down the road. I'm Chris Mackowski with Jim Doncaster from the Knoxville Civil War Roundtable. We're exploring the battlefield, or what's left of it, and I am delighted to be out here with you today, Jim.
I'm delighted to have you, Chris.